You heard it earlier. We heard the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen give an address following the morning's developments. She called on Russia to stop the violence and withdraw its troops from Ukraine. The forces have begun an attack on Ukraine with reports of troops crossing.
Will Putin attack Europe next? Putin's invasion of Ukraine has got every world leader wondering where his imperial ambition will lead him next. While concerns from the onset of the Ukrainian invasion were majorly centered around the possibility of another former Soviet Union state being attacked after Putin's war on Ukraine has been completed, recent findings have now led global leaders to believe Putin might even have his eyes set on an even bigger prize: the complete invasion and domination of Europe. If nothing, Putin's ongoing war in Ukraine has proven that he intends to achieve his imperial objectives by any means necessary. This has led many political analysts to believe that Putin's next land grab wouldn't be in an ex-Soviet state, but in EU and NATO member nations, an act that had seen Putin blatantly disregard Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. Tension is now rising all across Europe as leaders who previously assumed that Putin was bluffing because war would be irrational now see that he has purposefully chosen war to achieve an objective he could not have met by any other means. But how exactly is Putin planning to crush his greatest enemy, NATO, and bring Europe under his complete dominance? As always, we bring you exclusive details of our thorough investigations into Putin's strategies and plans. But before we bring you these intriguing details, do make sure to like this video, hit the subscribe button and smash that notification bell to receive notifications of when we post more mind-blowing videos about one of the most influential and feared men in the world right now. Do leave us a comment as well, as we'd love to read your opinions on why Putin would choose to wage war on the whole of Europe. Now, let's dive in. Could the nations in Western Europe and at NATO's very heart be next on Putin's list? Putin has now become a global outcast by virtue of his flagrant violation of international norms, the most recent being his ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Numerous sanctions from the world's superpowers have dealt a great blow to Russia's already dismal economy, raising the question of why Putin would pay such a wholesome price in his quest to reorder Europe's security environment and carve out a few more pieces of territory for Russia. From all indications, Putin's aim is clearly to set the European security system back by at least 3 decades to the Soviet era, an era when Russia completely ruled and dominated Eastern Europe, and to forbid the further enlargement of NATO. And unlike the Soviet Union, whose core priority was to preserve its post-World War II empire, Putin's Russia is on the move to recreate an empire and bring forward its strategic limits to the heart of Europe. The West's remarkable solidarity has for long prevented Putin from achieving this goal diplomatically. Now, Europe and the rest of the world can only expect him to pursue it by other means. And if there's one thing the invasion of Ukraine has again brought to the fore about the personality of the man called Putin, it is that he always means what he says. Now, this planned attack on Europe is far from anything the world has seen before. It's nothing close to what we saw unfold in Crimea or South Ossetia, or the ongoing attacks in eastern Ukraine, or anywhere else that Putin considers Russia's backyard. This is a grand scheme, which if Putin succeeds in pulling off, would completely change the dynamics of Europe and possibly crush NATO, as Putin has always hoped to achieve. This isn't some political gimmick by Putin to improve his approval ratings or anything of the like. This will be Putin's biggest effort yet to provoke the West's ire and instigate a full-blown war across all of Europe. Now it is no longer a question of whether he will attack, but where. Some experts point to Belarus, but Putin stands to gain very little from a show of force in a country that most Russians already consider an integral part of Russia. Other experts have predicted that the Baltic nations of Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania are possible next targets on Putin's list. Putin certainly views the small Baltic countries as a threat, given that they are all functioning democracies on Russia's border. But these Baltic nations appear to be really safe for now, as Putin's next adventure clearly points in the direction of being outside the former Soviet Union, as the West appears to have grudgingly accepted Putin's imperial ambitions in the region, even with Baltic nations being members of NATO. The most interesting prediction of Putin's next line of action is an attack on non-NATO members of the EU. Putin's most likely target in the near future could be either Finland or Sweden. By attacking a non-NATO country, Putin does not risk a proportional response in accordance with Article 5, which, by the way, he is fully ready for. Also, by targeting a European country, he can expect to reap the rewards of public approval at home from voters who are desperate for a victory. This is a simple cost-benefit analysis that Putin has conducted openly many times before. Each investment of Russian force has paid dividends, and Finland and Sweden meet both requirements. Realistically, Russian tanks would not roll into Helsinki or Stockholm without facing a strong opposition. But it would be relatively simple for Putin to execute a land grab in a remote Arctic enclave or on a small island like Sweden's Gotland, considering the strategic capabilities Russia has built on its northern flank. Just like Crimea, no country of the world would go to war over a frozen Baltic island or piece of Finland's tundra, thereby granting Putin a rather easy right to victory and success at territorial expansion. From Georgia to Ukraine, Syria and beyond, Putin's trajectory has been clear. By defying the norms imposed by the West, he has taken progressively greater steps toward emancipating himself. But he will only achieve full emancipation by confronting the West directly, a step he's now fully ready to take. All of these may sound shocking, but Putin has shocked the world many times over. The question now is, can the West and NATO afford to be caught off guard again? Putin seems very likely to commence undertaking limited grey zone operations directly against NATO countries, which have now become more vulnerable as a result of the Ukrainian campaign. Moscow is now in control of the strategically important Suwalki Gap, a 104-kilometer stretch of the Poland and Lithuanian border that runs between Russian-dominated Belarus. Romania, another NATO member and a military weak neighbor of Ukraine, may likely soon see Russian forces lining up along its border. Tensions between Putin and the West appear to have risen dramatically very recently following his invasion of Ukraine. Just towards the end of April, Russia stopped gas supplies to 2 European countries and has warned the West several times that the risk of a nuclear war is very real. When Putin succeeds in gaining full control of Ukraine, as he shows every intention of doing, his first strategic step would be to create a new front line of conflict in Central Europe. Until now, Putin could only deploy his troops only as far as Ukraine's eastern border, several hundred miles from Poland and other NATO countries to Ukraine's west. But when he completes his operation in Ukraine, he would be able to station land, air and missile forces in bases in western Ukraine as well as Belarus, which has effectively become a Russian empire. Putin is becoming increasingly clear about his goals. He wants to re-establish Russia's traditional sphere of influence in Eastern and Central Europe and bring back the times when the Russian Empire was at its height. A time when Poland did not exist as a country, the Baltics were imperial holdings, and southeastern Europe was still largely a part of Russia. A time when even the nations of the Warsaw Pact, despite the occasional rebellion, were effectively run from Moscow. There is great uncertainty about how far west in Ukraine Putin intends to go, and NATO's allies in the Baltics are already very alarmed that he may not stop at Ukraine at all. As the war in Ukraine continues to escalate and enter well into its third month, maintaining European and Western unity is likely to become more difficult, as Putin will continue to take measures that will undermine it in every way possible. Putin's failure to make military progress in Ukraine and crush the resistance will definitely lead him to attack even more indiscriminately, resorting to yet more brutal tactics, which could well spread to other EU nations. He has already threatened to strike Western military supplies in transit to Ukraine and could do so to show that he is willing to raise the stakes higher. The attack on the military training facility at Yavoriv, around 20 kilometers from the Polish border, where NATO has trained with Ukrainian forces and US and Canadian trainers until recently, remains another clear warning. While Europe must think more seriously about how they will deal with the war in Ukraine as it progresses, it seems unlikely that Putin himself will back down, as he has clearly demonstrated in his actions in the ongoing war, as well as in his statements in various public speeches since the invasion began. The map of Europe has experienced many changes over the centuries. Its current shape reflects the expansion of US power and the collapse of Russian power from the 1980s until now. The next one will likely reflect the revival of Russian military power and the retraction of US influence, which is exactly what Putin aims to achieve. Disclaimer: this is purely an informational video, and we're in no way promoting or approving Putin's recent action in any way.